Hello and welcome back to the Single Malt Frontier, where we explore the edge of innovation in American single malt whiskey. Here on the show, we do a little bit of tasting and a lot of talking. Usually we talk about whiskey, but the best thing about whiskey is the conversations that we get to have along the way, and we get to talking about a little bit of everything. I'm your host, Doug, or as I'm known around the internet, Demi Tastes. Phil unfortunately has the flu, so he won't be joining us today. And we are joined tonight by Ryan Lintz of the River Roots Barrel Company. And as always, let me know if I said your name incorrectly. Um, so River Roots is really interesting, and I'll be honest, I didn't really know about River Roots until Ryan reached out to me. Basically said, "Hey, I have some interesting samples. They're a mash bill that is a mix of malted rye and malted barley whiskey, and that's pretty close to American single malt. So since I'm known as like the American single malt focused person, he wanted to reach out to me for my opinion about sort of the flavor and quality of those products, and I gave him some feedback. Um, One of the possible outcomes of that would have been that we would do a barrel pick, but since we were still trying to get the McCarthy's barrel pick out the door, that didn't end up happening. Since then, Ryan reached out again with American single malt whiskey samples, some single barrels. And one of the cool things about the samples that we've been tasting from River Roots is that they're all made exactly the same on the same day, same barrel fill, same type of barrel. The only difference in the treatment of the barrels, whether they are light, medium, heavy toast, or what level of char they are. So with the malt rye, the malt and malted rye blends, we had 4 different barrel treatments. And with the single malts, we have 3 different barrel treatments. And so among other things that we're going to learn about River Roots today, we're going to talk about how that one variable affects the flavor of whiskey. And I think this is going to be a really fun tasting. It's potentially, we'll start with the single malts. I know sometimes I'm like, hey, we'll get around to the single malts, and then it's like an hour later and we haven't talked about them yet. That unfortunately is what happened last interview when we had Trillium on. And this time we're going to start with the single malts. That's the sort of topic of the day. Maybe we'll manage to interest somebody who sees this video in doing a barrel pick with River Roots, which would be fun for them. By the way, this is not a sponsored show. It never is. River Roots did give us these samples today to talk about. And since Phil has the flu, when he's feeling better, I will try to do a separate recording with Phil where we get his tasting notes on these samples as well, and we'll send that out. But for today, it's just me. And without further ado, I'll probably do some self-promotion, the usual in the middle of the episode. But without further ado right now, I'd like to introduce Ryan. Ryan, if you could tell us your name and what you do and tell us a little bit about River Roots.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Ryan Lintz, one of the owners of River Roots Barrel Company. We've been about a year and a half open. We're pretty much a NDP. And I guess kind of our story is we're whiskey geeks first, right? Like I've been drinking, been an enthusiast, really a geek of whiskey for the last 10 years or so. Doing all sorts of barrel picks, putting the stickers on the labels, putting that wax on, having all sorts of fun. And, in the Cleveland area, which we're out of, I thought there was kind of a gap on really providing, some quality whiskey. So started to build a business plan, got some investors. One of them, if you have any people that are into cooking or watch the Food Network, a celebrity chef, Michael Symon, and really popular in the Cleveland area. He's one of the owners too. He got involved, but yeah, so it was kind of this an idea of bringing, really focused on the single barrel experience, and kind of building out from there, but really focusing it on from a whiskey geek's perspective. And so what we do is, we just try a lot of different stuff. We handpick a lot of the barrels that we get in, and it comes from a frame that, why buy? We're small, right? And we're growing and we're getting more barrels, and I think the brand is growing well. But really, the idea of River Roots is just have fun with it. And what would be for an NDP if we just bought, let's say, 100 barrels of one particular lot, and we just grind it out and sell it? That's not super fun, right? We're not necessarily in it just to maximize dollars and just from a sales perspective. Want to have fun along the way. So we have a diverse offering of spirits. We have rye whiskey, we have bourbon, we have all sorts of spirits finished in, you know, double oak or honey barrels or port barrels and stuff like that. But also, and I think this is a journey of a lot of whiskey drinkers, especially if they go year and year is years over year, is all right, I like bourbon and then I like rye whiskey. What's next? And my personal journey was then I started to get into rum, then I started getting the armagnac, then I started to get into single malts and stuff like that. And some of them I like more than others, but it's that type of evolution that really brought us to River Roots, right? It's just again whiskey geeks just trying to find really interesting, cool stuff that we would personally buy and bringing it in and offering as single barrel picks.
Awesome. So I was going to ask as one of my just
Mhm,
like initial lead off questions was, so I know about your barrel pick program. Essentially,
mhm,
I've been calling it a bespoke whiskey club barrel pick program. That's sort of the way I mean, like as a market segment, that's a good way to narrow it down pretty tight.
right.
But like that's, you know, it's not just a barrel pick program. It feels like, I mean, at least from my perspective, it feels like a relatively luxurious experience of like, hey, I'm interested in a barrel pick. Cool. What types of profiles are you interested in? We'll send you a bunch of samples from some barrels that we have, and you can pick the one that you like the best. And like that's the same kind of white glove treatment that I would expect walking into a barrel house at, say, Westward Whiskey, and someone like Miles Monroe showing me around and saying, "Hey, does this barrel sound cool to you? Cool, let's taste it. Do you want to do
Yeah,
that as a barrel pick? Okay,
yeah,
maybe not. Maybe let's keep it in mind." Like that sort of thing. It feels like the same sort of thing, but remote.
yeah.
So I guess sort of two questions from that. Do you have a facility that you bring people into, or is the remote experience kind of typical? And the other one is, do you release any like own label products that weren't part of a pick?
Yeah. So, yeah, great question. So, yes, we have our own facility. It's small. We're actually are hoping to move into a bigger space later this year. But yeah, we have groups in, and actually, we prefer groups to come in. To your very point, Doug. It's like so if a person reach out to River Roots and be like, "Hey, I'm interested in doing a pick. What do you have available?" We'll have like I don't know, like 5 or 6 different lots of barrels or whiskeys that they can choose from, which is cool, and then we'll tell them, like, the proof and the general, like, tasting notes and the potential yields and stuff like that, which is fun, and they're like, "Alright, can we try this?" And we'd send them samples. But we recommend, if possible, and obviously, like, there's people all over across the country, and flying in a group of people to do a pick isn't always the most feasible financially, but we do recommend it because, to your very point, that's where it really gets fun, right? Like, this it's not like we're going to a major distillery and they're gonna roll out 3 barrels and that's what you're gonna taste. This is like, "Guys, let's get weird. Like, we got all these barrels here. Let's take a little sip of that. Do you like that?" And they're like, okay, we have this particular spirit there, and they're like, ah, it's not really. Well, just taste it. Maybe you will like it. It's those type of experiences. Kind of your point, like white gloving. Let's just explore and see what we find, and then if they find like a particular lot of barrels that they like, all right, let's dive into those a little bit more. Let's taste more of
Okay, so now there's obviously the customer's input is a really important part of that barrel selection process.
them.
For I'm sorry, I need to mute Discord because that's bugging me. Usually that's not a problem. I don't know what happened today. Sorry. So train of thought. So you've got a celebrity chef involved in the brand, which means that flavor is obviously going to be a focus. I mean, it's whiskey. Flavor is always a focus, but especially you've got a culinary sensibility behind the flavor. Um, and then what you offer as your primary product is a barrel pick experience
Yeah, right.
where people are bringing their own sense of what they like as flavor to the table. Obviously, you've curated the barrels that you've sourced in to begin with. Um, but I guess like, how do you square like a chef's sensibilities with the customer gets what they want?
Yeah, and there's different customers, right? Like what we learned, and again, the whiskey geeks in us just want single barrel cast strength stuff, and maybe that comes more from the bourbon side of things, where proof proof is king when from a lot of customers' perspective. But then also there's customers that just want something that's, 95, 100 proof, that's good in cocktails and approachable, and they can sip on it and stuff like that. So that's kind of been the evolution, especially with Michael Symon and some of his followers, right? Um, and we see that like Michael Symon, aside from like enjoying the single barrels and experiences and the taste profiles and that, he likes to have again a whiskey that's around 100 proof where he can make cocktails. The recipe and the cooking world then translates very easily to making cocktails and things like that. And to your point earlier that I never answered is, so yes, we do batches, we do blends. That's kind of more of the minority right now, or the lesser. We still focus on the single barrels. We do our own single barrel picks. Actually, we just released some today, and one of the rye barrels was a 12-year Indiana rye whiskey. It sold out in 3 minutes, a whole barrel of it. So, and then we have some bourbon that was finished in honey, and then an 8-year Kentucky bourbon that's pretty cool. So yeah, we do our own single barrel picks of this. And then also customers do single barrel picks. And maybe I should have talked of it. And here's an example of one. This is from Seelbach, Blake from Seelbach. This is his American malt whiskey that he picked. The idea is it's super customizable, right? Like the label, again, being a whiskey geek, nerd is tater, if you call, in the bourbon world, is stickers and wax and bringing that experience to the front of the label, really, instead of the back of the side of the label. So you can see here on the side it says selected by Seelbach. They can put their logo here, and then they can select the art right here, right? So it's bringing that. You're spending a lot of money on a single barrel, might as well make as much your own as possible. And then like here's another example. Here's one of River Roots's bottles that we did, again selected by the founders of River Roots. It has our little logo on there. And then this is a picture of the Cleveland Galleria. It's one of the oldest malls in America. So yeah, we'd like to have fun with it. And so, yeah, we do our own single barrel picks, but a lot focused on the customer and just doing picks like that way.
Awesome. Okay. So let's maybe get some whiskey in the glass. I see you already have.
I already have
behind the wall. So let's just walk through what I have in front of me. So obviously I have the 4 samples from before, and I'm just going to show off. This is how geeky we are. When Ryan sent me those samples, he sent me this breakdown of exactly what was in them, down to the distilled and emptied date, the barrel entry proof, which you don't get from everybody. And the total, the final proof, the char level or the toast level, and the barrel numbers. So it wasn't just like, hey, here's some samples. And part of this was like, I might have done a barrel pick. There was a world in which that could have happened. Just the timing didn't work out. And so what was fun for me is that not only did I get to see all this geekery and taste this stuff ahead of time, I also got to see when some of these barrels came out. So like I saw that Seelbach barrel. And I saw, from this list, 503, 501, 507, 505, a friend of mine didn't know that I had these samples and sent me a picture of, I just got this cool River Roots whiskey. And I was like, oh, cool. Like I got to try that one directly from them. And then the aficionados program, or the Our Bourbon, I forget which one it was, but they're sort of affiliated.
Our Bourbon, yeah.
Our Bourbon did a pick as well. And I got to see some people posting about it from there. So like, and that is a very geeky whiskey community, right? And the fact that I'm hearing about River Roots, not just from the source, but also from different disjoint communities of geeky people, really speaks to the success of the brand in capturing people's interest.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And I'm one of the geeks. Like I had my own blog in like 2017, 2018. I was on Reddit all the time. I was geeking out, man. And then, so that's why, Doug, why I reached out to you is, so while I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on particularly bourbon and rye whiskey and stuff like that, and I built up my knowledge pretty good on Armagnac and rum, I didn't feel like I didn't know enough about the community from a single malt perspective or a malt perspective. So that's why I reached out to you. Like, I want to talk to somebody that's knowledgeable and really knows that market. Is again, I'm thinking about purchasing these barrels. Like, how often? Like, is this stuff really good? Is it really interesting? Like, I just wanted somebody's take that really knew that side, that spirit more than me. So that's why, yeah. I mean, I geeked out. I gave you like literally all the information that I would want if I was receiving the samples. I gave to you, and I was just like, yeah, let's chat it out. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, and we really got deep into it. We tore
Yeah.
into deep nitty-gritty details, and some of those I think we'll touch on today. But before we talk about those samples that I got last year, let's talk about the samples I got this year.
Yeah.
So I have barrel. They're not necessarily sequential, and I guess that's interesting. So maybe there's multiple barrels that you get of each one of these
Yeah.
specs. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So I have barrel 581, 583, and 589. They're all
Mhm.
American single malt whiskey. And they are 3 different types of barrels. So we've got a char number 3, a medium toast, and a heavy toast. I'm going to start with the medium toast. That seems to make the most sense to me.
Mhm.
I probably just put all 3 in a glass and then kind of jump between them because that worked pretty well for me last time.
Yeah, so the interesting thing and why you do that is to give viewers background. So the first lot of barrels that we got, this American malt whiskey, was 13 years old, and the proof was high. I think those ones, the 13 years, were around like 146 to like 152. We sold out. We got a handful of those barrels. We sold out on those. Like Doug said, people really liked them. And then we said, well, that was fun. I wonder if there's any more. We tasted some different things, but what we landed on is a very close mash bill to the 13-year-old, but this is a 7-year-old American malt whiskey, and this is distilled in California. The samples that Doug has here, it's 7 years old. The average proof or approximate proof is 147. And the mash bill, and I'm sorry, maybe I'm diving too deep here, Doug, but the
No,
mash
that's
bill
perfect.
on.
You've got a geeky audience today. Go for it.
Okay, all
All the
right, cool.
details.
All right. So yeah, the mash bill on this one is 88% malted barley and 12% malted rye. And then,
Okay,
like Doug
so this
said,
again, it's not an American single malt. It's not 100% malted barley. Okay,
right, 100%. Yeah,
gotcha.
that's why
So
I'm calling it American malt, because it's not a single malt, because there is
right,
rye in there.
American malt. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for correcting that. So it's actually the same mash bill as the 4 samples you sent me last year, right?
I think it's
Oh, it's
extremely
a little
close
different.
percentage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that one was
Yeah.
76.3 malted barley, 23.7 malted rye. So we're a little more barley
Yeah. Yeah.
this time around. Okay. Cool. Well, I will update my notes that we're not talking about American single malt today. We're talking about American malt whiskey, and it's so adjacent, especially because the other component of the mash bill is malted rye.
Right.
That like this is absolutely worthy of the conversation, and I've said that over and over again. Right? If somebody brought a 100% malted barley, malted rye whiskey into the subreddit, I'd be like, yeah, go for it. Like, and that's not what we're talking about American single malt whiskey as a legal category, but like that is in the same, it's in the same universe. That's probably too big. It's in the same solar system. I just need to stop punching my mic. It's in the same solar system as American single malt whiskey. Definitely worthy of the same conversation.
In the
So,
community,
okay.
and this is just from my knowledge, Doug. So like in the single American, single malt
Mhm.
aspect from American whiskey, like understand single malt, and I know, and I guess is American malt thought of as a lesser quality spirit than a single malt, American single malt?
That's a great, there's room for a whole op-ed on that, right? That's a great question. My opinion is no, I don't
Mhm.
think so. What's interesting is that American malt whiskey, with the exception of essentially only a few, let's say craft does everything, but if you leave the realm of craft, uh, American malt whiskey has been a legally protected defined category for a very long time. That the definition, by the way, 51% at least malted barley, and the rest of the grains can be whatever you want, and it's aged in new charred oak. So there's some differences here in terms of like, we can get into that, right? There's like, we can get really, really deep nitty gritty technical details, and like, I love talking about that stuff because in a way, like, I'm a rules Nazi, or not rules Nazi is wrong, a new rules lawyer, right? We're gonna have to censor the video. Rules lawyer, like D&D style, right? Give me the book and I will find the loopholes because they're fun to talk about. But like, at the end of the day, the thing that matters is, are we having fun, right? Does it taste good? And if the fact that it's malt, or in majority malt, is the thing that gets you in the realm of does it taste good, that's the thing that matters to me more than anything. Single malt, I mean, one of the reasons I've thrown my weight behind American single malt is because it's a category that like no other podcaster is focusing on, right? And it's a category that has a ton of entries in it. It's just, there's a lot to explore. The fact that it was a product in the process of being regulated was really interesting. And now that I've been along for that ride for so long, that I'm just like, I'm still in it, I'm not just like, oh, it's ratified now, we're done. I did have, like, when the ratification happened, I had like, I've been waiting so long for the ratification, I don't know what to do. Am I done? Is it over? And then it's like, no, this is a category that needs education thrown behind it still. But that American malt whiskey product that already existed, that was the same definition as rye whiskey or wheat whiskey or triticale whiskey or whatever. It's all the same definition, just swap out your primary grain, and you still have to use the new charred oak. So for people who like bourbon and want to try something a little different than bourbon and tried rye, and the rye didn't quite work for them, there's still this other thing. There are many other things, but the other sort of predominant category is the American malt whiskey, because malt is already in bourbon and rye. It's in every whiskey that you make because of the enzymes.
Right.
So it's sort of a natural thing for people to say, what if we flipped it around where it's mostly malt instead of corn, and maybe the other part is corn and rye. And then, so like, that's the thing that you could do. The thing is, how many of those products are there on the market? Woodford rye is a 51%. If I remember correctly, it's exactly 51% malted barley. So a barely legal rye, right? In that sense, in the way that people talk down about barely legal malt, in the way that people talk down about barely legal rye, that is 51%. And it's not like, is that inferior? Like, I think we're splitting hairs on like, the question that matters is, does it taste good?
Right.
And I think the reason that American single malt, the 100% malted barley category, captured the attention of, I'd like to think it captured people's attention better than malt whiskey did, because it follows the tradition of what the rest of the world is doing. With everybody's like, let's follow Scotland and Ireland, mostly Scotland though, because Ireland really likes their single pot still, or their blends of the three different styles. Scotland is primarily about the art and craft of single malts now, anyway. You could argue whether that was always the case, but now certainly Scotland is known for single malts, and the rest of the world has fallen in since the mid 20th century in doing the same thing. Every country, Japan, Australia, Israel, everybody's falling in line and making making a single malt product. And it's actually funny to me, and I think largely because that American malt whiskey product existed, and the way that American whiskey laws talk about the types of whiskey has always been so different from the rest of the world. Ironically, the United States is like last to the party on single malt. So I think the reason that, I'm for me to some extent, but I recognize the validity of all the other things. One reason and I think a lot of other people are excited about single malt in particular is because it's so new. It's so new for an American thing. And like, people love Scotch. I love Scotch. And the fact that, I can also add in the sort of patriotism angle of like, and now I have single malt made in the United States. Like, that's great. But the malt, the Woodford malt whiskey is actually a really good whiskey. It's only an accident that I don't have it on my shelf, essentially, because, at some point I had to cut how I was choosing what to buy, but it's actually a really good, sort of traditionally made American new charred oak whiskey. You gave me a platform to go off. I hope I kind of
No, it's
answered your
good. I
question.
wanted to get your opinion on it. I thought of I actually I knew that in general that was going to be the answer. But to your point, and I think this is for everybody that drinks whiskey, right? Like you just want to find something that just tastes good or it's interesting to you, especially as I feel like your palate evolves and you just I don't know. I mean, my journey through whiskey, it's right, is this like you just want to be tested and try new things and stuff like that. And this will test you. This is a unique mash bill and unique bottling here for sure.
Do you have the barrel entry proof of these ones handy?
I I probably did at some point, but I don't have it now.
Totally fair.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things to like to nitpick in terms of like what's in this whiskey. Um,
Hmm.
but first of all, let's talk about how it tastes. Actually, I'm going to acknowledge the audience a little bit. For people who've said hello, Freedom Malt's hi. He says hi, Doug and Ryan. And I think we've already sold Freedom Malts on a barrel pick. Um, Freedom Malts has a pretty good and rapidly growing platform. He does the blind sample showdown where he invites influencers from all over to come on and blind taste whiskey of any category and try to guess what it is, and he awards points according to a rubric. And you have everyone from Adam and Nora of Lost Lantern to that one dude
Oh,
Ryan
cool.
actually has not been on, but like that sort of like imagine, right? Like the
Mhm.
Hood Sommelier I just went up against. Couldn't think of a better person to lose to. Spoilers if you didn't watch that episode, everyone who's watching. Joe, welcome to it's been a while since the last time we saw you. Good to have you here. And Tom Morrow says hello. Cameron Leach speaks highly of your brand and rightfully so. You have amazing juice. Congrats on your success.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So that's a little bit of roll call for you. So yeah, let's actually talk about flavor before we get nitpicky about what's in these whiskeys. Because I
Sure.
do have some thoughts, right? I have some sensory analysis kinds of thoughts that I've been building up over the last quite a while of months. I don't even know the first time I got your samples, but like it's this sent me on a journey, and it sent me on several journeys. And as you said, you had a blog, so you can sort of appreciate there's some angles on this whiskey that not your brand in particular, but categorically as a brand within the industry, or sorry, categorically as a type of whiskey within the industry, there are a few things that are really compelling and really interesting. Like it tastes a certain way and it's built a certain way. And there's some nitpicking to do with the rules and what does this all mean? And
Yeah.
I wanted to write so many things, but I couldn't figure out how to do it without making somebody sound like they're doing something wrong.
Hmm.
So I'm going to just preface this whole conversation by saying, I don't think any of this is wrong per se. Ideally, I would like certain things disclosed, me personally. And if the TTB says it's okay, then it's okay. And like ultimately is what it comes down to. And at the end of the day, this is in the realm of things that taste like the way I'd expect them to taste. So I have no major complaint. But I do want to like I want to apply my geekery and talk about all these little things. But before we get there, let's talk about the flavors. So we have three of the same thing. One is medium toast barrel, one is a heavy toast barrel, and one is a char number 3. They're all 7 years, 7 months. Everything else about them is identical between the three. If I remember correctly from the last time I tasted through these, I liked the heavy toast best. So I wonder if I'll feel the same way today. I've tasted so far the medium toast and the heavy toast. And what I got from that so far is the medium toast is a lot more caramelly and it has a lot more citrus to it. It's very bright. Yeah. And the heavy toast this time around, I don't remember this last time, but this time around gives me like a smokiness, which considering that it's just, it's not a peated whiskey. It's just a new heavy toasted barrel in this case. Not charred, right?
Yeah, not charred. That's heavy toast. Yep, just toasted.
So it's really interesting on essentially a fresh palate that I'm detecting a kind of smokiness in here, right? Smoke
Right.
doesn't have to come from peat or from smoking the barley. It can also come from the barrel.
I
So I think
actually
that's what I'm
kind
getting
of
here.
the smokiness to me isn't it's not like a peat smokiness. It's more like a barbecue hickory type of flavor on my palate, at least.
Yeah, it's like a hardwood smoke,
Yeah, right.
which makes sense, right? It's the treatment of the barrel.
Mm.
And then, sort of no surprise here, but the char number 3 barrel tastes the most like bourbon to me of this set. But I wouldn't say it tastes like bourbon. And I think there's a few reasons for that. For one thing, it's 80 something percent malted barley, and the rest is malted rye. So that's already, we're talking about that malted flavor profile, for one thing. Malted rye, by the way, is my Achilles heel when it comes to Freedom Malts challenges. I've been wrong about every malted rye that he's thrown at me so far. Just reads as something completely different to me. I don't know how to read malted rye yet. So keep sending me samples like this because I learn it better.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, now sort of like going back through to do a little bit of like tasting notes and sort of like, so the first time I tasted River Roots, I didn't know where the whiskey was coming from. I have, I think, a pretty good idea. Ryan will not confirm or deny. But at least as far as the malt whiskey goes, we know that you're sourcing from California.
Yep.
And from having done some research about the types of places that people source from, in my opinion, this is very likely to be Charbay. And if that is correct, I believe that everything that Charbay has distilled has been a ready to drink beer, inclusive of hops, which means that this is what I would call a hopped whiskey. Now, there's 3 ways that you could be a hoppy whiskey. One is you distill a beer that had hops in it, and then technically, I'm not sure how the TTB is treating this, but my particular reading of the rules, and I've been wrong before, and I've been told this isn't quite accurate, this isn't quite how TTB applies the rules, but my reading of the rules is that if you put hops in the mash before distillation, it is now a distilled specialty spirit, not a whiskey. And I actually think if that's, I mean, even though that's my reading of the rules, I think that's the wrong way to treat this, because American single malt and American craft beer are so intertwined that the mere difference of whether there are hops in the whiskey or not doesn't seem like a categorical type change from whiskey to something that's not whiskey. So as far as I'm concerned, we should treat this as whiskey and call it whiskey according to all the rest of the rules, even acknowledging that there are hops in the mash. I don't know if you'll confirm that there are hops in the wash on this one.
Yeah, you're correct on that.
Okay, cool. And where I got that from, so again, I didn't know anything. I tasted the whiskey first and I said, that tastes like a hopped whiskey to me. And the reason for that is because I get this sort of the sort of hop oil flavors, the high citrus floral notes, and there's just a tiny bit of skunkiness to it. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Some of my favorite whiskeys and beers taste that way. It's cool to have that come together in a whiskey so nicely.
Yeah, and sometimes how I describe it to people, well, I ask them going in before they taste this whiskey. I say, "Do you like IPAs?" And some of them will say, "Yeah, it's all I drink." I'm like, "You might really like this."
Yeah, I would agree with that. This is a whiskey for IPA lovers, absolutely.
Yeah,
Especially the medium toast one, because that one lets the most of that hoppy flavor through. And this is where I say I would like this to be disclosed very clearly on the label, because I do think that there's a categorical flavor difference, not like a whiskey versus not whiskey, but like a let's say like a bourbon, an ex-bourbon single malt versus an ex-sherry single malt have essentially a categorically different flavor, especially if we're talking about first fill. Scotch enthusiasts will kind of know what I mean by that and largely agree. There's exceptions, of course. And I think that whether there were hops in the distillation or not is essentially that same kind of distinction. If you know there's hops in it, you know a certain flavor profile to expect. And within that category of hopped whiskey, there's a fair amount of variation. I've had a few. Like, they're not super common, but they're more common than you might think and often not totally disclosed, which I think is interesting. And so, like, we have, for example, this is public knowledge. I'm not outing anybody by saying this. The Lost Lantern Mountain Meadow, which is a St. George whiskey, is distilled from a hopped mash. And they label it the same way that St. George labels it, and they were essentially grandfathered into the TTB label that way. So that's their justification on that, but they're transparent about it. And I'm not saying you're not.
Yeah, no. I wasn't taking it that way, but like, so they're saying that it was American malt whiskey, or saying it was a hop whiskey?
I believe they just called it. Actually, let me go check because the label is interesting, if I remember.
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting part of it, right? And again, American malt whiskey, you can is it hop whiskey? Is it American malt whiskey? I wonder if people go to American malt over hop whiskey because people don't know hop whiskey. It's probably not as good as a selling point, I assume.
Yeah. So actually, so since I'm thinking about it again, let me kind of finish that soundbite. There's three ways to be a whiskey with hop flavors. One is there are hops in the mash, which it's then distilled.
Mhm.
And categorically, that might shift it from whiskey to distilled specialty spirit or not, depending on how TTB applies the rules. The second is you could have a whiskey that you add hop flavoring to, and then it becomes a flavored whiskey, a hop flavored whiskey, and the appropriate whiskey type, but the modification of the whiskey type gets applied in the TTB in that case. And the third way is that you take a whiskey and you age it in a barrel that previously held hoppy beer, especially like an IPA or something. Those are the three basic ways that you get hop flavors in a whiskey. The third one is, according to most people, because it's a finished whiskey, the fact that it picked up hop flavors, somehow that's more pure of a whiskey, right? I mean, in American whiskey laws, except for American single malt, the fact that you put it in a finishing barrel means you now have to apply for a special label, a special type designation with the TTB. So we could quibble over that too. But like, I think most whiskey enthusiasts consider a finished whiskey to be more like a whiskey than a flavored whiskey. And maybe they consider a flavored whiskey to be more like a whiskey than a whiskey that was distilled with hops in the mash, or vice versa. But we could think all different ways about these three things. But to me, I've had whiskeys that were aged. So we've got this River Roots whiskey that I know has hops in the mash. It's sort of the first time that like I've really gotten direct confirmation of that besides the Mountain Meadow. And we'll talk about that. But I suspect that that's the case for a lot more whiskeys than Let On. And I have a whiskey from Westland, which is explicitly not a hopped mash, but was aged in various types of beer casks. It was, what was the name of the whiskey? It was one of the cask exchanges, the Bellwether, the Bellwether Brewery Cask Exchange from Westland. They started their normal, single malt unhopped mash. They put it in barrels that held beer before, including like beer that was flavored with pine resin or frankincense, like weirdo things like that, where you get the most extreme versions of those essentially hoppy flavors out of that whiskey. When that's just a finished, that's the third type, the type that most people would consider to be most like whiskey, that tastes the most hoppy of any whiskey that I've ever had. And then you have things that were hop flavored, and that's up to how much flavor they add in. There's a lot of nuance there. And we could quibble over like how whiskey like that is, and the fact that you have that kind of direct control. Where's necessarily the art in that? Like for me, the flavored whiskey is the one that is at the bottom of my list.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
So barrel finished whiskey enthusiasts agree that's fine. Hops in the mash, whiskey enthusiasts go, I don't know if that's okay. And as of last year, when we were talking about that first set of samples, I didn't know where I came down on this question yet, but I was investigating it really thoroughly and ended up deciding that I can't say it concisely. So if I don't say it on a podcast, it's probably not going to happen, because like once it's in writing, people can quote it and misquote it. And, I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking the whole thing. And I've probably said far too much about this, but I'm gonna highlight this comment from Freedom Malts real quick. So don't have an issue with I assume good was hops. Don't have an issue with hops in the mash pre-distillation. When talking about ASM, I don't think it should be labeled as ASM. Whereas finishing or aging in a beer barrel is okay to call an ASM. And I think I agree with that take. I think that's That precise question is the one that I've had such a hard time deciding my feelings about. Should it be considered an ASM or not if it's distilled with hops in the mash? Because on the one hand, I see the argument that there's such a close association between craft brewers and craft American single malt. And the choice of including hops or not feels like an obvious choice for that group of people to make. So it feels fundamental to the DNA of the thing.
Does it change your
And
mind that this necessarily isn't a single malt, that it's an American malt?
I think essentially that question's off the table because this isn't
Okay.
an ASM. And as for finishing in a beer barrel for American single malt, any number and type of finishing is part of the definition. So of course that's okay. And I think out of every type of whiskey that the American whiskey types have, that's the only one where that's not even a question, right? Bourbon finished in a beer barrel is now bourbon finished in a beer barrel, right? That's the type you have to apply to the TTB with. But American single malt finished in a beer barrel is just, it's part of the type American single malt. You don't have to apply for a special label for finishing with American single malt because any type of cask is included in the definition. So that's interesting. Now, just to be abundantly clear, I think that hopped whiskey should count as whiskey. I just want to know that that's what it is. I just want it to be disclosed. That's my take as a consumer, as an enthusiast. If I walked into a store and I picked up something that somebody told me was good, but they didn't tell me anything about the flavor profile, I had no reason to expect it was a hopped whiskey. And I was expecting not a hopped whiskey for some reason, which is mostly because just by default. And what I got was something that to me tastes like a hopped whiskey. And I'm looking all over the label. Does it say that it was a hopped whiskey? I don't know that I wanted a hopped whiskey. I treat it differently as an ingredient for cocktails, as a thing to choose on a given night to drink. So it would throw me off. I don't know if it would upset me. If it tastes good, it tastes good, right? But it would throw me off if I bought something thinking it wasn't a hopped whiskey and I got a hopped whiskey. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Freedom Malt says all good with this happening in an American malt. It's just an additional ingredient in the mash bill. That I completely agree with that as well. Yeah. Which is thank you for helping me directly answer Ryan's question. Yeah. So for something like this, the fact that there's hops in it doesn't bother me at all. I would like it disclosed, right? I'd like to know before I bought this bottle that that's a flavor profile that I should be expecting. But to me, that doesn't make it any less whiskey, as far as I'm concerned. So that was my big flavor soap. I finally got to do it, guys. Everybody who knows me in private has known that I've been agonizing over how to talk about this topic for forever. And I finally had a reason to do it with essentially an expert on the topic on the podcast. Even though I soapboxed, I got it off my chest.
No, and like, obviously as an NDP, we didn't distill it, like there's assumptions being made, like all sorts of stuff with that. You can just taste these particular things and go to those conclusions and stuff like that. But I totally understand, and my personal opinion is I agree. Like if there's hops in it, I think it still should be called American malt whiskey. I think that's clear. Adding that it was hop whiskey somewhere to the label also makes sense. Yeah, or
Now,
hops were involved in the thing. Yeah.
of course, I leave it to you, the marketing team, and the lawyers and TTB to decide what's appropriate here. But I do think it's important for the enthusiast sector to sort of air. Is this a grievance? I don't know. To sort of air our feelings about this particular point. I do know that there are people, some pretty people with a wider audience than me, who have strong opinions about hopped whiskey not being whiskey. And I think that I can see why. And I can also see why in the influencer thing, like washing off all nuance and just having a strong take is the right move for engagement. But for me personally, I just think nuance needs to be applied. I want transparency. I want disclosure. And beyond that, I think these products deserve to exist. So let's make that abundantly clear. So Lost Lantern Mountain Meadow, I grabbed a sealed bottle, but I drink this all the time. It's in my cabinet. This is the first time I had an American single malt that was distilled from a hopped mash. We know that this is distilled from a hopped mash because they told us. They've said as much in interviews. Nobody's trying to keep that a secret. They do. So this was what I wanted to check. They do label it as California single malt whiskey. And the reason they do that is because that's what St. George does. This is Lost Lantern's take on this matter. Not because they wanted to call it a single malt, but because that's the product that they sourced from St. George, and they labeled it the same way. But they did make a choice with the color of the label. Lost Lantern's label colors mean something. So gold means a special whiskey, but it doesn't mean single malt. And special whiskey sometimes just means like this is something that breaks boundaries or doesn't necessarily fit into clean, or in some cases it's a really expensive whiskey. But like they usually, if it's clearly a rye or it's clearly a single malt or etc., they'll label it that way. So we similarly have. Was this the 6-year one? No, this is the 3-year one. But Lost Lantern's McCarthy's is the brown label. That's what they label their single malts as brown. And if I remember right, the 6-year McCarthy's from Lost Lantern was $150. So the same price as the Mountain Meadow. So it's not a price thing that they're using the gold label here. They're just saying there's something special about the category of this whiskey, even though it says single malt. They know this is a hopped whiskey. It has an interesting, different flavor profile. So this is their way of saying expect something different. And I like that. They didn't go so far as to say on the label that this was distilled from a ready-to-drink beer with hops in it. But they do give a list of flavor notes: fresh and piney, hints of Meyer lemon zest, lemon verbena, jasmine tea. Those all kind of sound like IPA notes to me. And I mean, this is a beautiful one. This was one of my favorite whiskeys of 2023. And definitely the most interesting whiskey of 2023. So the fact that it has hops in it doesn't make it inferior in any way. I just want to make that abundantly clear. And I think the same is true of the River Roost whiskey. So I know that they have a hoppy flavor profile, but also know that this is whiskey that has a reason. It has a justification to exist. It tastes good. All right, I'm going to try to get off this soapbox now and move on. So we've talked about, I think, Charbet. We've talked about that this is all of your malt whiskey is sourced from a single distillery. We may have only said that in the pre-show, but for the record, all of your malt whiskey is sourced from the same distillery. So if you're getting a malt whiskey, you can expect a pretty similar flavor profile in broad terms from River Roost. Of course, single barrels are all unique. Tell me a little bit about the other distilleries that you've worked with and the products that you've sourced from them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously as an NDP, you and us wanting to get different lots from different stuff, we've all over the place. And mostly we focus on rye whiskey and bourbon and stuff. So a lot of our stuff comes from like Indiana and Kentucky. And in Kentucky, multiple distilleries from there. I'm trying to think if we have gotten, but I say that like, not that we wouldn't want fine whiskey from Wyoming or New York or Texas. It's just we're just trying to find cool and interesting, tasty stuff, and that's where it has taken us. And for this American malt, we found this, and I guess as you can say like we're bourbon and rye drinkers first. We tasted this and be like, wow, that is really interesting stuff. We like it. It's high proof. It's different. Let's get some barrels. And that's really what it comes down to, and everything, I like outside of Kentucky and Indiana, I love to get samples from different stuff. And it's just kind of finding what's the best.
Can you name or speak about any of the companies that you're sourcing barrels from?
Distilleries? No, I have an NDA with all the barrels that we source. So if you're in the rye and bourbon, you can assume some of the heavy hitters there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have a related question from Freedom Malts. Do you have plans to source from many different places? I think you just answered that.
Yeah.
And also, do you have plans to eventually create your own whiskey or just stay as an NDP bottler?
Yeah, I think the plan is to always just and do an NDP, right? Like there's a lot of craft distilleries, a lot of big distilleries that make good whiskey. Um, and like we're not experts on making whiskey. We don't have I mean, there's obviously like a romantic thing about making your own, like an artistic way of like, I'm making this, we're aging it. It's really cool. But it's just really not our expertise. I guess the expertise that we bring is we just like to drink whiskey, and we think we have pretty okay palates, so we're just trying to find stuff that way. So no, we're never going to have aspirations to distill our own stuff. We thought about originally about having contract distilling and making our own mash bill, but like especially now in the market, it's like, but why? Like there's all these different things already out there. Why not just and there's been a lot of whiskey produced in the last 5 or so years, right? So why not just kind of ride the wave of these interesting whiskeys that are hitting the market and just go to the fun part, right? They're already aged and now you bring them in and you enjoy them and you sell them and you just bring on the new stuff instead of making something or contract distilling something, letting it sit for at least 4 years and then just kind of crossing your fingers that all that money you spent is actually good whiskey. So at least that's our thought process of it. That's our kind of business model. And honestly, our business model of River Roots will always kind of have this boutique-y little feel to us. We don't have aspirations to be huge and be on liquor store shelves in all these different states. Heck, I mean, outside of Ohio, at least for the foreseeable future, I don't see River Roots being on liquor store shelves anywhere. Will we do single barrel picks with liquor stores across the country? Yeah, we've already started to do that. But like having a blend of River Roots that's on liquor store shelves, that's not our main focus. So
I'm getting a really strong licorice note from the char number 3 barrel.
char
Just
3,
thought I
yeah.
should share that.
Yeah, I agree with what you said before. I think, well, it's really the heavy toast and the char 3. Those two are the ones that I think appeal more to the bourbon drinkers.
Yeah, I'm trying to
Yeah.
remember what I said without like going and pouring all 4 and tasting them and filling up a bunch of dead air or forcing you to fill up a bunch of dead air while I figure out what I think again. Um, if I remember right, I want to say the heavy toast and the char 1 were actually my favorites. But I'm not a bourbon, like I drink bourbon occasionally, right?
Yeah, right.
But like I think it's obvious that I focus on single malt and especially American single malt, and there's a reason for that. I like it the most. And so things that align more with a bourbon profile are likely to be farther from what I want.
Mm-hmm.
That said, that hoppy layer adds something here that you wouldn't
Yeah,
normally
right.
get from that profile. So like there's still validity for that. Do you remember the aficionado? I don't know how well you remember your individual picks, but do you remember the profile of the aficionados barrel?
No, I don't.
Sorry, the R bourbon barrel.
The R bourbon, I think. You mean well, like what char? I think he went. No, I'm almost positive. I think Jay take char 3. I think that was, but from what it was compared to the others, I will say high level is. I remember in those barrels that, in my opinion, at least as a bourbon drinker, that the char 1 and the char 3 had more bourbon types of notes to it than the toast ones. The toast ones, I think, let maybe the grains and maybe the hops, if that were included in the in the distilling process, which I think we all think it is. I think that shined a little bit more, but but those hops are definitely present on all of the barrels. Yeah.
All right, I poured the char 3 so I can talk so I can at least taste the thing we're talking about
Hmm.
from that old set.
Oh, from the old set, yeah, yeah.
So I didn't realize until it was sold out that 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 the Our Bourbon program had done a pick from River Roots.
Hmm.
So it's cool that I have one.
Yeah. Actually, here's a little teaser. I don't know if Jay will want to say, but Jay running it back. So he did the 13-year, and I'm almost positive, don't 100% quote me on this, but they did the 13-year char 3, and now he's doing the 7-year char 3. So
Oh, okay. Was that first set? What those were? Yeah, 2011
yeah.
to 2024.
Hmm.
So yeah, 13-year. Cool. Yeah,
Yep.
those were really good whiskeys. And the
Right.
only thing, I mean, just for you, and we've talked about this at length already. Like the main thing that was making me waffle about them was not whether I thought they tasted good, but about that. How do I feel about that as a category?
Right.
You know. And I wish that I had been clearer with you about that because I do think they're very good.
Yeah. No. Yeah, it's interesting whiskey. And honestly, truthfully, and I tell this to people that have, there's nothing for us to hide, right? They're super polarizing barrels. Probably the most polarizing whiskey that we've ever had at River Roots. There's some people, and that's why I kind of at this point, like as more people tasted it, I've like helped them lead into what they're going to be tasting, right? Or and I asked them like, do they like IPAs? Like you haven't tasted a whiskey like this before. And some people are like, nope, negative, not for me. And that's perfectly fine. And some people
Yeah.
are like, holy, how can I get more of this? Never had anything like it. I love it. Um, and it's honestly like really, truly like 50-50. But the people that like it really, really like it. There's actually, um, uh, it's been amazing how this whiskey has extended and exposed me to people that are customers. There is a group in South Korea that was exposed to River Roots because of this American malt at cask strength. And Mr. Kim over in South Korea fell in love with these barrels and stuff like that. And he is doing a River Roots barrel pick, our first international pick. So yeah, I mean, again, it's very polarizing. Some people is like, nope, not for me. And some people are like, it's amazing. So, and and honestly, for me personally, I go back and forth about sometimes it all depends on, I think it's for everybody, right? About how something's hitting on a particular day. I kind of go back to, yeah, it's pretty good to, yeah, I love it, um, type of thing. It's even for me, it evolves and this is a whiskey, in my opinion, um, that I would drink on just certain occasions and stuff like that. It wouldn't be necessarily an everyday drinker for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But
I really appreciate that dose of reality, right? It's
yeah,
so often that producers are just like, our thing is the best all the time. You should only ever
yeah,
drink
no,
this. So like, and me personally, like I think getting to know our guests, I love buying products from people that I know something about. I don't have to have been the one to interview them. I just want to be clear. Like,
mhm,
it's not that. It's like, have I listened to you talk on a podcast where I've heard what you think and that resonates with me in an authentic way and I understand your process, that sort of thing. And so, you know, I'm aiming to fill the niche that was left by there was no other podcast doing American single malt, doing that service for American single malt brands, um, except for Single Malt Matters that discontinued about a year before my podcast started. And actually, if he hadn't stopped, I wouldn't have started
mhm,
because right, like what's the point? You know, filling a gap in the space of podcasts makes sense. Doing the same thing as somebody else is doing at the same time doesn't make sense. So I wouldn't have bothered. I would have I would have stuck to my reviews on Reddit. Uh,
yeah,
there's nothing wrong with
right.
that. But I switched from that to this. So um,
But that's actually when you
yeah,
say that, Doug, and that's one of the reasons why. Well, it's one of the reasons why we got the 13-year American malts and why we then ran it back for the 7-year. Is hey, like especially when you're in the bourbon and rye NDPs, like you're trying to find stuff that's a little bit different, right? Especially like again, as a whiskey geek, like I want stuff that's different or barrels that are really good that interest me. And, from a bourbon perspective, that's usually higher age and higher proof, or an interesting
Mhm.
mash bill or different notes that you don't necessarily get in the common stuff. Um, but as an NDP, right, how do you differentiate yourself from other NDPs and stuff like that? Well, I mean, this is different, right? And what I've learned, and I knew this before, but this company is one person's trash is another person's treasure. Everybody's palate's different. Some group could come in and they're like they could taste 5 barrels, and there's one that they like the least. The next group comes in and they pick that barrel that was their favorite, right? And so why transparently say that even I go back and forth with these American malt stuff. That's not to say that other people don't love it, and it's not to say that other people it is their least favorite, right? But that's what's fun about it, right? Is like we're not so cookie cutter, and we're just going to stick to the stuff that we know. We like to go out and experiment and have fun, and these are what these malt barrels are all about.
Absolutely. All right. We have some great questions that came up on Discord earlier that I dropped in the chat. We might do a little bit of rapid fire on some of these, but let's start with
Okay.
this one. So from J Doge, we would like to hear about the tasting and barrel selection process that you go through. So this is before you offer them to customers. How do you initially choose the barrels that you might want to source, purchase, and offer?
Yeah, so it's different for whoever it's particularly coming from. My preference would be that we taste every single barrel that we bring in, and we've done that for certain lots. Sometimes you can't do that, and you have to just taste a barrel from the lot and pick from it. So it's been pretty much like 50-50 on what we get, but we feel pretty confident. We have never bought whiskey that we hadn't tasted before we bought it. So, you get a sample, it's one barrel sample, but you at least know that this is the general proof, this is the general flavor profile. Will there be fluctuation? Absolutely. But that sample that you got, you'll know that it'll be around that realm and you feel comfortable with it. But again, our preference is to taste every single barrel that we bring, and we've done that with some of our lots, and that's when we feel the most comfortable. But we've had a good luck in that the lots that we do get when we just taste from one, um, the whiskey that follows those lots are in the same realm, the same quality, and the reason why I think is because they're coming from distilleries that wouldn't have that really have that issue. So yeah, great
Okay,
question.
so there's an implied question here.
Mhm.
Do you taste in person, or do you get samples into your location before you pick? And if you travel for picks, what's the furthest you've traveled for a pick?
Uh, so uh, we get samples sent in, and we go down. Mostly, it's been in Kentucky or Indiana to taste the barrels and stuff like that. Especially when we're hand selecting each one of them, tasting which one of them, we have to be down there, right? And we'll just mark the ones that we want and stuff like that. Um, Sometimes when tasting individual barrels isn't the opportunity, um, there's really no point to go down there, so they'll just mail the samples up, and us as a team will taste them and figure out if it's meets the standards of River Roots. And actually, it's been an interesting time for River Roots. The brand has grown, especially in the last 6 months, and people that reach out to River Roots now, and they say like, "Hey, I'm interested in doing a barrel pick," and that's when we would send our portfolio, like our list of whiskeys that we have. Um, right now, we are completely sold out of bourbon, and it's I guess from a business perspective, it's a good problem to have, right? Like we're having a hard time supply and demand, but the reason why we're out of bourbon is because we're picky, and we could have already had whiskey in here, and we could have been kept selling, but we just haven't found anything that we felt like was the standard. So I'm tasting through stuff now, potentially going down to Kentucky. Feel like we're getting closer. But yeah, I mean, for the last month or so, I knew it was coming, and I just we just refused to just buy whiskey to fill the gap. So right now, when people reach out and like, "Hey, I'm interested in getting a bourbon," I'll put you on a waiting list, and as soon as we get some stock, we'll let you know. And are we losing money or opportunities potentially? But I feel like that's better than getting some whiskey that we're not 100% behind. So
Yeah, that's awesome. I love to hear that, right? Find the right whiskey, not any whiskey to meet the demand.
right.
And I want to touch on one thing that you said earlier that felt worth commenting on. The idea that you're not going to start making your own whiskey given how much whiskey is available on the market right now.
Right.
Which is absolutely it's true. It's a great observation, right? Like now would be arguably a poor time in 2025 to start producing whiskey when you already have a demonstrated quality business working with sourced in whiskey and finding the right barrels with the right flavors, because there's a softening in the whiskey market. Let's say it's gotten a little harder to move product. So the fact that you're having to turn away customers says a lot about your brand, that people are still coming to you even in the softening of the market. But it also does point to maybe now's not the best time to start making a whiskey.
Yeah. Well, you know what was funny? What was it? And I can't remember who wrote it, but there was an article that came out. My father-in-law, like all these people, my my uncle sent me messages knowing that I own a bourbon company now. Sent me the article that the bourbon boom is over, right? And there's been articles about this the last few years, and how everything's going down. And I was just like, guys, that's perfect for us. We're not distilling anything, and there's all this bourbon or that's going to go into the market. That's exactly what we do, right? Like, bring all that stuff on. We don't have anything on the shelves. We're not at risk of being in liquor stores and our stuff sitting. We literally, good or bad, right or wrong, we're just literally flowing with the market. And does that mean in 2 or 3 years from now there's going to be prices are going to go down on barrels? That's great, because then we're going to be able to provide lower prices to people to it. So yeah, that article about the bourbon boom being over, there's going to be more whiskey for us. And I feel like our little niche of kind of, I guess, being more of a enthusiast type of brand, right? That's kind of looking for that more of that geeky stuff. I feel like that niche is always going to kind of be around, right? There's always going to be those enthusiasts that want those type of things, but we're not the Jim Beam white label, or we're not looking for those entry level people and selling in mass volumes where the boom is really affecting us. As long as there's still enthusiasts and people that like, in particular, bourbon and rye whiskey, I feel like River Roots will be pretty good. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it. Check back
And then
in
of
2 or
course,
3 years from now, though.
right.
Yeah,
We'll see.
yeah,
Well,
right.
we're giving you a bit of a platform. Hopefully
Yeah,
this drives some interest. I mean, Freedom Maltz said that he's interested, and I take him at his word because he's not one to be facetious about that kind of thing. So,
great.
um, and I know that he's sold a whole bunch, I assume sold, but he got a bunch of custom Glencairns made. Here's my chance to interject some self promotion. He got a bunch of Glencairns made for his whiskey club. He does have a sizable whiskey club, the Northwoods Whiskey Geeks, I believe. And he pointed me at the person who did his Glencairn engravings, and I had some of my own made. So for the Whiskey Lodge Discord, we have this design, and the design that goes along with the McCarthy's barrel pick that we did, and the podcast logo is on the other set of Glencairns. So you can order either of those Glencairns at the link in the description. That is my personal self promotion, but also a shout out to Freedom Maltz has a sizable enough community to buy a pallet of Glencairns, and it's a whiskey club, so there's some appetite for whiskey there. So I think that's probably a genuine thing. He might be in touch. The Northwoods Whiskey Nerds. What did I say? But yeah, there you go. That's the name of the club. Okay, let's get. Oh, sorry. Another follow-up comment on that, I guess, is that another good thing about there potentially being extra barrels to source is that brands tend to stick to their flavor profiles, especially the big brands. You're dealing with bourbon brands in Kentucky. They're going to stick to the things that make Wild Turkey 101 taste like Wild Turkey 101, or the things that make Eagle Rare taste like Eagle Rare, or those are all single barrels, I guess. So ish. So maybe that's a bad example, but like the things that make Buffalo Trace taste like Buffalo Trace, the things that make Russell's Reserve 10 taste like Russell's Reserve 10, and so on. Woodford, Beam, yada yada yada. Or who's doing the sourcing stuff? Bardstown, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's all. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, contract distilling, Bardstown, Green River, those are big in the bourbon and rye thing. Obviously, MGP is huge, but all the distilleries are
Right.
in it. All those distilleries have barrels that are on the market to purchase. And sorry, I'm kind of, but like, I think what's
Yeah.
interesting in how this evolves is all these craft distilleries then that are doing bourbon and rye and all these things, right? How successful they are, did those barrels start to come onto the market? Then it starts to not just be, these big dog distilleries that you're working with. Now you're trying to find this really, hey, did you taste this 8-year-old bourbon that was made in, Nevada that like came from this distillery that went kaput? Like, oh my gosh, you got to get that. Like, I feel like that might be the evolution to the market. Is it's not just, there's going to be some older age craft stuff that comes onto the market that might hit, that might be really good stuff. We'll see.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, my comment was kind of along the lines of these brands have flavor profiles they're going to hit with most of their barrels, and
Right.
they're not going to be trying as hard to sell their unique barrels, the ones that don't necessarily fit in that profile, which often will have not bad but different flavor profiles. This is kind of how the independent bottling thing works. Independent bottlers and NDPs that are sourcing whiskey are a way for the market to absorb whiskey that wouldn't be sold under a distillery's own label. And the harder it is for a distillery to sell more quantity of their own product, the more availability of that off-label of that, off-profile stuff will be to sell. So
Right.
that's only a good thing for independent bottlers and NDPs finding better and better quality stuff.
And that's actually true, because there's stuff that's on the market that's made by big distilleries, that isn't a part of their main mash bills that make up their bourbon and rye whiskeys, and they come out and you can see that they're distilled by this major distillery producer, but it's not one of their mash bills. And then this question becomes like, so why'd they make it? Who'd they make it for? Why are they selling it now? But 100% that happens in the industry, is these distilleries are making mash bills that are different from their own, and then for whatever reason, whoever they made it for or whatever they did with it then goes onto the market. So it to your point, yes, that is exactly what happens in some instances, and that's what's interesting, because you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, we're having from this distillery a mash bill that they've never released under their own brand.
All right, let's so Freedom also agrees that it feels like that evolution is already underway, and I also agree with that statement. Okay, so another question from Discord. So Bullet Magnet asks, how does approaching a whiskey with an Iron Chef differ when selecting a barrel? And I guess differ relative to if you weren't choosing with an Iron Chef.
Yeah.
Like, how
No,
does
I
that
think
affect the process?
no, I think it's just all, yeah, I mean, he has a great palate, right? I think it's just in general, just his taste and what he likes. I've actually never really spoken to him about what is his preferred flavor profiles on stuff. He bounces around a lot. But yeah, no, I mean, in general, it's just like whatever tastes good to us, whatever we feel like is interesting to us, we get. So sorry, it's not a clear answer, but yeah.
That's fair. I mean,
Yeah.
we try asking the question. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
a 5-minute conversation, and sometimes it's just a quick answer.
Yeah.
Okay, so when people come to you looking for a barrel pick,
Mhm.
how often do they already know what they're looking for before they start the process?
Pretty, I mean, so it all depends. Like the conversation, they'll ask what's available or ask for particular barrels that we've been releasing that have been pretty popular. And then we'll just, even when they say like, hey, I'm just looking for your 12-year rye whiskey, we'll provide them the list of all the stuff that we have, right? And then they can say, I just want the 12-year rye whiskey. Can I get samples of that? Or can I come in and taste those? And then, yeah, we go through that. And sometimes people, actually, Cameron Leach, which I saw one of the viewers mentioned, his very first pick that he ever did, he came to River Roots, and he was dead focused on bourbon, 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 bourbon. And the barrels that we had of that bourbon were good, but the rye whiskey barrels that we got in were better. And I told him, I'm like, let me have you guys, before you go really deep in the bourbon, let me have you try the rye. But he wanted to focus on, and rightfully so at the time, like thought for his viewers the bourbon would sell easier, so he focused on the bourbon. And he did a barrel pick of a bourbon. And then I said, okay, so you did that, so now you want to try the rye? And they're like, all right, now we can try the rye. And I tried the rye. He's like, okay, shit, let's try the ryes now. And he ended up doing a rye pick instead of a bourbon pick. So like, it's interesting. Like people come in with this, and just kind of like single malt and American malt. I think in the bourbon and rye part is, I think people come in with like bourbon sells easier, which is true in general. But if you have a really good rye whiskey, it's going to sell. And that's just the proof of point is we have some bourbon for sale. We just released a bourbon that's 8 years old. I think it was 124 proof today. And then we released a 12-year rye whiskey. The rye whiskey sold out in 3 minutes. And the bourbon, there's not many bottles left, but it's still for sale. So that just goes to show you, like, one person's thought about what sells it really, and I guess our customers at River Roots are starting, they're the geeks, the enthusiasts. They know what the good whiskey is and they're jumping at it. Whatever it be, American malt whiskey, or a rye whiskey or a bourbon or whatever's in between. And we're looking at doing some other stuff. I like rum. I like Armagnac. So I feel like at this point we've kind of built up the brand that we might be able to expose some followers to those types of spirits and stuff like that. I've enjoyed that journey into those spirits. So, and I feel like as a bourbon and rye drinker first, I see similarities in Armagnac. I see similarities in rum. So those are easy steps for me and I think for the brand, that's an easy step to at least. It won't be a huge focal point for us, but again, it's something that's cool. And selfishly, it's fun for me. It's fun for some of the other owners of River Roots. So why not just buy 4 or 8 barrels of some Armagnac and rum and just have fun with it? And
yeah,
it might take us some time to sell through them, but hey, that's the fun of it, right? We're getting what we like, and some people might like it, some people won't. But anyways,
so I agree with Freedom Malts. I like rum. I'm also a fan of Armagnac. Both of those things sound great to me. Just going to throw this out there, or maybe combined with a question that I had for you. So first of all, the question: have you considered holding on to some of these barrels, warehousing them, and putting them into finishing casks as an evolution of your business?
So we've done a little bit of that. We have a small place. We're hoping to move into a bigger place this year, but we have a small place, so we don't have the space to age a lot of different barrels and stuff like that. And honestly, yes, we have finished stuff. We've done some port finishes. One of the bottles that we have up right now is a cast strength Kentucky bourbon that was aged. We got a local apiary to age honey in 3 barrels. They dumped it out. They sold the honey as aged in a bourbon barrel. They gave us those barrels back, and then we dumped bourbon back into those barrels. So we have been playing with finishing a little bit, and we had some double oaks. So we have been doing that, but we're limited in space that we haven't blown it out. Maybe if we move in this new place, we're able to do it. I have some ideas of some other cool finishing that I was thinking about. Actually, it would be interesting if your group thinks this is interesting. Again, kind of going outside of just the bourbon thing. Um, was thinking about getting some wheat whiskey, higher aged wheat whiskey, and double oaking it. Um,
Hmm.
because wheat whiskey, you get a lot of like grain forwardness with that. But double oaking it might be a fun experiment. So that's something that I've been thinking about and kind of playing around with. So yes, we are definitely playing around, thinking of those ideas. And again, it kind of goes back into the geeky part of it, right? Like, let's just have fun and let's just try to figure it out. We've actually played around. We had one barrel uh, so it was Kentucky bourbon that was aged a year in a re-charred oak barrel from Calvin, if people know the Calvin cooperage. Then we dumped that into an American malt whiskey, one of those 13-year-olds, put that in there. It was in there for about 2 to 3 weeks. And I talked to one of the owners, Tom, and I was like, Tom, we might have messed up this whiskey. We might have ruined it. So then we dumped it into we had some 15 and 16-year-old bourbon barrels that we dumped. So then we dumped it into that, and that miraculously brought this quadruple oak, if you want to call it that, to great. So like literally from geeking out and just like, hey, what if we put it in an American malt barrel? We're like, might have ruined it, and then added it to another barrel, and it became outstanding. So yeah, we're just having fun and experimenting and see what's a good fit for us, and yeah.
Yep. As Freedom Malt says, experiments are fun. I know it's not necessarily as fun when you're sitting on thousands of dollars worth
Yeah.
of liquid that has
Right.
maybe been ruined, but
Yeah.
um, it's
Yeah. When
cool. I
you're
mean,
like,
I wonder how much your sort of the culinary perspective on cooking things might have helped uh figure out the right thing to do to save that whiskey, or was it's more of a team decision?
yeah, no, I think this is more of it's profiles, right? Like, um, the double oak that bourbon that we put into it. The reason why we double oaked it is because we thought it was the flattest of all the barrels that we had, right? It like needed something, and we're like, what could we do? And actually, so again, gosh, I mean, how deep down the rabbit hole do we want to get? This will really show you how nerdy we were getting. So we were Maker's Mark. They have like a stave program, right, where they put like actual staves, and you can pick like the different stave flavors into your whiskey, and then it ages for a while, and then they dump it. So instead of double oaking, we were thinking about having like a stave program. So what we did is we got these staves from this company, and they said to get a 750 milliliter bottle. And at this point, we were thinking about using rye whiskey. I think it was a 7-year rye whiskey, and we put different flavored staves in those bottles. And I think it was supposed to sit in there for a month. And that would have been a representation if we were to put the full staves into those barrels, and that would be kind of the final product. So we had like 7 rye bottles with all different types of staves in it, and we tasted them all, and they all had different flavor profiles. But in the end, we were like, it's not. It tastes artificial. We don't like it. And so we had like 7 of these rye whiskey bottles. So what did we do? We dumped it into an American malt whiskey barrel. We literally forgot about it. And actually, this is one of the bottles that I'm drinking now. It came out to be 154. I have a picture of it. It was only 7 bottles in this barrel, so we had to drill into the barrel head
Wow.
and pour it out. It was like super dark. The American malt whiskey like transform. It does not taste like a rye whiskey anymore. It tastes like this. It tastes like a modified version of the American malt, but like sweeter.
Mhm.
So, anyways, that is what gave us the idea to put that Kentucky double oak into a malt. Um, but it was a much higher volume and and it was it was a bourbon instead of a rye. That didn't necessarily play. And then so that's when we're like, well, okay. So now it seems like it has a little bit of that hoppiness from the American malt. It actually, I think I remember it kind of being a little bit astringent. It was like a little bit too bitey. So I was thinking, well, it might be interesting to put it into one of those 15-year-old bourbons that we had that had like some like dark fruits to it that was a little bit richer. Um, Dump it into that, and that seemed to do the trick. I don't know how that happened or why it came that way. I was actually shocked. But yeah.
All right, I have a few questions that I've picked out of the
Okay.
list that I prepared, and I know we are at 6:30, so I just want to say that. Um, how are you feeling about doing like a few closing
Yeah.
questions, maybe
If you
rapid
don't mind, yeah,
fire-ish?
a few more questions, we could wrap it up. Like it's 9:30 here. I gotta put my son down.
Yep, totally
Yeah.
makes sense. So earlier you mentioned tater stickers and your own take on doing the presentation so
Mhm.
that people get to put their branding front and center and
Right.
the stuff with the wax and everything. But since we talked about taters, let's talk a little bit about the secondary market.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is true, but somebody mentioned that some of your bottles are available at secondary prices. Are you aware of that? And if so, how do you feel about that?
I've seen some stuff. I mean, again, as an enthusiast, I know of the secondary market. May or may not have purchased, from there, from those areas in my day. In general, I think from a business perspective, no, I have no problem with it. Like, I think it's good for the brand to be recognized. The enthusiasts that a lot of the people, our customers that are doing picks with River Roots are, I think, the people that would be going to the secondary market because we're high age, high proof type of spirits looking for those type of things. So no, I don't have any problem with the secondary market. It's like me seeing it, like I know some businesses are like, well, these guys are these guys are flipping it and making money or what whatever. We as a business, we're taking our margin that we feel comfortable with taking, which we feel like is pretty reasonable um, pricing that we have right now. But if somebody's flipping it and the whiskey that we thought we liked and bottled and people want it and they can sell it for a higher price, great. That's fine by me, honestly. So
Have you considered that as feedback that you might need to raise your prices on some of these products?
no, that wouldn't be. I because the goal of River Roots is to get bottles and people. First of all, we're a business, right? We got to make a particular margin on stuff, but also I've lost out on a lot of barrels of stuff just because I thought as a consumer, what would I buy this for, right? Like I have, and we talk about it as a group, right? Like realistically, could we sell this for $250? Could we sell this? This person's trying to sell us these barrels, but this would get us to this particular price. And we've lost on a lot of barrels just because we just don't think we it's that price point would be the right thing to do or to try to get it. So yeah, no, I mean the price points are raising it. I've never thought that the stuff that hits the secondary market, when I see it hit, I've never thought to myself we should have charged more. I've never thought that. We've gotten what we needed to get out of it, and it's on the secondary market. And I think in general terms, it's good for the brand.
So when you say you lost out, you mean you didn't select that barrel or you took a loss on it?
No, lost out. Like we didn't get it because you're dealing with either distilleries or barrel brokers and or they're like, all right, so to buy these barrels we need to get it for this amount, this price per barrel, and then you do your calculations, right? Like, oh, this is all of our cost of goods sold, this is all the margin we need to, this is to buy it at those barrels at this price, this is the price point that we would need to sell it to customers at to get our margin. So, and then when you do that math, And you're like, well, that means I'm gonna have to sell these bottles for $400. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? They're like, no, 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 we're not buying. It's great whiskey, but we're not selling for $400.
Yeah, so that bottle you were holding up that was one of 7, did you say, that came out of a barrel? What was the
Yeah,
price
one
per
of
unit
four.
on that?
One of four. It's not. This is a distillery only. Because we didn't
Okay.
want to go through I don't even know. To your point about I don't know what you
800
would call
bucks.
this thing. Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah,
We
what would you even
actually,
call it? That's a great point, yeah.
we had we have another uh, bottle, was one bottle that one of the guys in the production, it was our 18-year-old bourbon that we had. And it was like a partial bottle, it was the end of the barrel, and he mistakenly had an American malt. I don't know why this all happened with the American malts, actually, now I think about it. He
They're
mixed
funky and
American
magical.
malt with the 18-year-old stuff, and there's literally one bottle of it. It was already open, like there's nothing to sell, and we have it at the distillery. And somebody did a barrel pick, and we were just messing around, geeking around. He's like, "I will give you $800 for that." I'm like, "We can't sell you that," but yeah, so fun stuff, man.
Okay,
Yeah,
flip this around just a little bit. Has there
yeah,
ever been a particular whiskey you wanted to source, but either due to availability or unwillingness to sell, you weren't able to get that barrel?
yeah. I mean, I think in general, like as a bourbon, I would love to get old stuff from some of my favorite distilleries, and you just can't get it, right? Like, you gotta, you know, know people, know connections, what's on the market, who's able to sell. Like, I mean, personally, I love Heaven Hill. I mean, if Heaven Hill has some 20-year-old bourbons for sale, let me know. I'll charge more than $400, guys. Um, but yeah, like, now you're just talking about like I would love to have some old stuff from some like the really good distilleries and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, but that's just being uh, not being connected enough, or not having the opportunity, or probably mostly them just not being available, or them never selling it. Right? Why would they sell something like that if they could make their own money on it? So, but yeah, I mean,
Right, I
all the
I
time
guess
I dream about stuff like that. Yeah.
you probably wouldn't have even gotten a chance to taste something that they weren't willing to sell, right?
Right. And then your question about, and this is the thing about when you're getting samples or when people reach out to you about it, then you get suspicious, right? You're like, so why are they selling it, right? Is it bad? Is
Mm,
it good? Like, yeah. How? And then here comes the really important question as a business owner: how much liquid is in this 18-year-old, this 20-year-old barrel? Like, am I? And that all factors into what the price point is, right? Like, so they can tell you how much the price per barrel is, but then also you need to have an understanding of what the actual volume within those barrels. Because let's say if you buy a barrel for $10,000,
so
and
isn't that, I mean, TTB
yeah,
requires pretty stringent paperwork on, like, weigh-ins and all, like, isn't that information you could get? Like, you know what the dry weight of the barrel is, you know what its original fill weight is, because they have those records. You should be able to know what the weight of the barrel is now and figure out how much liquid is in it, right?
in the transfer and bond, I there no, there's a lot of, at least to my knowledge, and a lot of places take a lot more risks than we do, but there will be like people will buy lots of barrels, and there will be barrels that are literally empty.
Damn.
We've gotten some short barrels they've yielded, like our particular bourbon, 8-year bourbon that we got. The average yield was around like 140, 150 bottles, and we got one that had 40 bottles in it. Um, and I was negotiating on some barrels. There was 36 of the barrels, and finally convinced that they should weigh them. And two of the 36 were empty. And then there was 5 that had like probably the equivalent of 5 to 10 bottles. And I'm like, well, that affects the price of what I'm paying for you, but then also I need like if you're only going to get 5 bottles out of a barrel, you're going to have to charge a lot of money for that. So these are the type of things that you try to figure out. But there's some there's a lot of places around, more of the bigger dogs, that just buy stuff sight unseen, and unfortunately we're not there yet, to be able to make decisions, or or have the buying power to not taste it and not necessarily care about the weight and just purchase it. And just, I guess it's kind of like just taking losses, but yeah, we're not there yet. We'd rather just be picky, get to a price point that we feel comfortable with, and being able to taste it. So
Yep. Fair enough.
maybe we
Okay.
get there when we're big dogs like that.
Just a couple questions to wrap up. So first of all, we're talking today about a super high proof hazmat 7-year-old malt and rye malt blended mash bill, not a blend of whiskeys, but like mash bill. It's a mix of malt and rye malt with hops in the mash, which is a challenging flavor profile for a beginner to get in. So my question for you is, if someone was new to whiskey or new to your product and wasn't necessarily into the super challenging profiles, what products should they start with?
And with our stuff,
Yeah, with your stuff.
yeah. I mean, I think in general, when you're new to whiskey, we do have lower, we call our Founders Reserve rye and bourbon, and they're at 95 and 100 proof. So that lower entry proof, lower entry for a person that's entering whiskey, that lower proof point is easier to palate and stuff like that. And usually, we'll talk about, I have no problem people putting ice in any of our whiskey or water in it or putting it in the cocktails, whatever. People that are evolving, and I've been trying to work on my wife for years. I would try to make her all sorts of cocktails, right? Because sometimes for at least bourbon and rye drinkers, let's start off with a cocktail. Let's get them a Manhattan. Let's get them an old fashioned. Then they can start drinking like 100 or 90 proof bourbon, put some ice in it, and then you kind of you climb the ladder that way. So that's what I kind of recommend, is go to the lower proof stuff, maybe work on a cocktail or water it down, and then go from there. But some people show up, it's amazing, like at River Roots, they'll be kind of into just be getting it started. I don't know if it's the ambiance or being a part of like just the environment, but and I've asked people, like, do you like beer? Do you like IPA? They're like, yeah. And these new people into whiskey, they love the American malt. And it's just like, that's 148 proof. You're like, I love it. I was like, okay, well, you just skipped a couple steps there, but good for you.
All right, cheers, Whiskey Punkard, and great call out, right? We're talking about spending $10,000 on a barrel and only getting 5 to 40 bottles worth from it. That's a yikes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's there.
We are just about wrapping up here, so I'm gonna do what we've been doing for a while, and I'm gonna not completely ruin all of this whiskey because I have like a half ounce of each, but I'm gonna blend the 3 whiskeys that we had for today in roughly equal quantities, and then give them a taste on the way out. Now, since they're the same mash bill and everything, we're really just blending barrels here.
Right.
And that's kind of an interesting thing to give a try. So let's see how this comes out, because what we had is the really IPA heavy medium toast, the somehow smoky, like hardwood smoke heavy toast, and then the sort of licorice note quality that I was getting from the Char 3. So we'll see how all of that shakes out. And I just have one last question for you, Ryan, before we close out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Where can people find your whiskey, or where do you like to sell it most often, I guess? And if somebody was interested in getting involved with a private barrel pick with you, how would they reach out?
Yeah, great. So like I said, we're kind of boutique-y. Well, we're definitely small and boutique-y. So we're not on liquor store shelves anywhere outside of Ohio, really outside of Northeast Ohio and the Cleveland area. We have some bourbon and some rye and some of our Founders Reserves, but like our more unique geeky stuff that we get is either sold at our gift shop in Cleveland, on our website, riverrootsbarrelco.com. You can go on. We have, like I said, a bourbon finished in a honey barrel. We have a regular bourbon. We have some bourbon, some ryes. We have a double oak coming out soon on the website. But then, really, primarily most of our business is from private groups or liquor stores across the country. So if you are interested in learning about, doing a River Roots pick, you can reach out to support at riverrootsbarrelco.com. So co. So riverrootsbarrelco.com. Support at riverrootsbarrelco.com. You can reach out, and then we'll just tell you what we have available and what the price points are. And then if you're interested, we can either send you samples or you can come to Cleveland. Like I said earlier in this podcast, we're very picky about the whiskey that we have. Demand has been high. We don't have any bourbon right now. We can put you on a waiting list, but rest assured, whenever we do get that whiskey in, that we feel confident that it's good enough for the brand and good enough for a single barrel program. So,
all right, perfect. So, all right, I just want to comment on everything I've tasted today. Actually, my favorite is the medium toast. It reminds me the most of that bright, citrusy, fresh, like this is why I say, like, aside from last year, I wasn't sure how I felt about hopped whiskey. This is really good whiskey. And the one that tastes the most like hops is actually the one that captured my attention best out of everything I have today. So that's the medium toast barrel number 589. And if that's not already been picked, there's my endorsement. If Germ, you want to run with that, I'll be down for a bottle. Yeah. Thanks, Freedom Malts, for tuning in. Yeah, so Freedom Malts is committing to checking with the group and seeing if this is something they want to do. So that's cool. And that group, once again, let me scroll up and find that comment for anyone who's interested. That is the Northwoods Whiskey Nerds. And
I will say, when you look that up, Doug, I will say, and we don't have many of these barrels left. We didn't buy very many of them, although there weren't many made. We don't have a lot of them. And actually, we sold a few of them already. I think we have 2 or 3 of these barrels left. Actually, each of the ones separated. But we are offering groups to do half barrel picks of these. They come in not 53, but 59 gallon barrels. Beautiful barrels, by the way.
59-gallon barrels, right? So I believe Balcones told me that's the size of barrel they were using for their larger scale aging in Texas to like offset the environment somewhat. It's not that different.
Interesting.
The 59-gallon is not that different from 53, but it apparently makes enough of a difference.
Well, from a volume perspective and evaporation perspective. So I think, and I can look at my computer, but I think the general yields of these 7 years is around like 200 to 240 bottles. That's pretty high. And we know like some groups like, wow, okay. So we are offering half barrel picks of those malts. So that gets you around like the 110, 120 bottles, which is much more palatable for groups. Especially for an interesting whiskey like this, right? So, But we have gotten the ones we have. I think there's been 2 groups that have picked the full, 3 groups that have picked a full barrel, and then 1 group that picked half a barrel. So, anyways, they're liking it. It's a good price point too. Yep.
All right, so with no further ado, let us do the actual send off. So, so with the Doug Happy Hodgepodge blend, so it's odd if ever a blend that we did right here on the spot happened to turn out better than the sum of its ingredients. It hasn't had time to marry. A blender's touch has not been applied to this in any appropriate measure. At best, we get something that tastes like all of the things and doesn't taste worse, but all is right with the world when we get something that does taste worse. So I blended these 3 whiskeys together, and what I got was probably the worst aspects of all of them, and a bit of an astringent quality. So I can't say that I'm so much enjoying this little blend that I made. I probably don't want to cheers with this one to go out with, actually, and that's a first. I will, however, grab my single malt Frontier glass, and I will cheers to this one. So these are all great whiskeys, and I'm really thankful, Ryan, that you were able to send these samples to me and that you were able to come on and tell us a bit about your brand today. Sounds like you have a customer, so that's or possible, right? So that's a great outcome of something like this, and I hope that everyone learned something today. I think a lot of podcasts ignore NDPs because they aren't the ones making the liquid, but it is a valuable part of the industry, and it's an interesting part of the industry, and I'm glad that we got a chance to represent that point of view here today. So with no further ado, Ryan, thanks for coming on. Cheers to you. And until next time, everybody, we'll see you in the lodge. Good night.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.